record on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So when I was here for the first time, it was just a whole bunch of new everything. It was Melbourne in some ways looks like parts of the Bay Area, especially parts of San Francisco in what they call the CBD, Central Business District, which is what we refer to like as downtown, right? So if you're in downtown San Francisco and you're looking at downtown Melbourne, the CBD, you'll see some similarities in the way that buildings look, culture, people. Melbourne, like the Melbourne area, has a lot of folks. It's, several million people around here. But the way that it's built, it's Melbourne is the central part of this area, and then everything else is just suburbs and suburbs and suburbs and suburbs. Very great transportation, public transportation, so you can get around really well on buses, our equivalent of BART, like their trains and trams. All right. But in this particular area, the indigenous people who are here are called the Wurundjeri of this area. The Wurundjeri. It's like it's different. Like I could probably type it in. But then there are a lot of other folks. So just like us in the Bay Area, you have the Ohlone. And then where we are in the East Bay, you have the Muwekma Ohlone. And then there's the Ramaytush Ohlone on the peninsula. So, you know what I'm saying? There's the different groups that belong to like the same community in a particular region. So you have all these different groups of people throughout the entire country. And what was really shocking for me, but it's similar to, I think, our experience in the Bay Area. If many of us were asked to identify somebody who's native or indigenous, we would have a difficult time seeing them just, walking around in Oakland or San Francisco, wherever we are in the Bay Area. They're there, but like you got to be connected to folks and, really see folks because so many of them have been pushed out, right? And here, same, you don't really see them. Like it took me a couple of trips before I actually had a chance to meet some folks who were from the communities here before all this European British colonization took place. And then all these other waves of migration came that continue to push them further and further out. And then you have people who are like in the Northern Territory. So the northern part of Australia, you'll find a lot more out there. But it's wild. And then another piece, which was really, really interesting. So Malcolm's daughter, Ilyasha, she came out here. Sister Angela Davis was out here as well. Mm-hmm. And we all had a similar experience because if you say Black out here, there'll be people who are who look like Joe Biden that will say that they're Black. Mm-hmm. Because their ancestors were the native and the indigenous folk, and the Australian, like the white supremacist, white-led Australian government went through a campaign of trying to like wipe that genetic code out. So they forced those people to be bred with, white skin, Anglo-European folks. And so you'll have people who white passing, but they'll still say that they're Black. Then after that, you'll have people who, like my wife, her folks are from East Africa, or you'll have people who've come from West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, and they're here in Australia. So it's very clear that they're melanated, Bilalian. We even if we want to throw that in there, right? So like you can see them, and it's clear that they are Black people and identified as Black people globally. Mm-hmm. But because of this history, their Black is like the secondary Black. The original Black are the native and indigenous people, and including those who were part of the stolen or like the lost generation that was wiped out because of this genetic breeding that the government forced these people to endure. Is really wild. So you go to some museums here, there's a lot of books on it, but you'll see that, and then people will be in society and, they'll talk about that a lot. But who is Black and like who controls the identity of Black tied to that word is very unique and different here in Australia. But
Mm.
you'll find the native and indigenous people, you'll find the awareness of who's in that particular area
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. They do this thing called welcome to country. So depending on what group, like where you are, if you're in Sydney, if you're in Melbourne, if you're in Brisbane, when welcome to country is done, it's like a um, First Nation acknowledgement. We have something in the States that we do similar to that, where we'll be like, we're recognizing the fact that we're on native and indigenous land, that the native people are the original owners of this land. They do it. I think it's even more purposeful and intentional the way that I've seen it, but still it's a colony,
Mm.
and it's an entire system and way of life that's built upon the theft of land from other people, the extraction of those resources, the dehumanization of those people. Uh, and I'll end with this part. One of the things that really stood out to me, I was, just reading some of the history on it. And in the 70s, there were these like white Australia only policies. And one of the things that they did, they defined, it may have been before this, not just the 70s, but in the 70s, there were the like white Australia only policies, very similar to the history of segregation in our country or in the United States. But prior to that, they designated native and indigenous people as flora, FLORA, and fauna, FAUNA.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and we talk about 3/5 of a human being in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, that we weren't considered fully human, 60% human. Native and indigenous people were considered flora and fauna. Y'all are like the bushes, the trees,
Yeah.
the naturally occurring environment that's around us. We don't see you as human beings. And that's why we don't recognize the fact that y'all are the original owners of the land, because you're just like the grass that we're walking on. It was wild. You know what I'm saying? So they're
Yeah.
still trying to reconcile that and deal with that. So I think that might be tied to the apology piece. And
Yeah. Now
yeah,
you got to give big props for at least the country coming together and saying, "Hey, we know just to the apology." I mean, that's a big deal. That part of it. I mean, it's horrendous. It's monstrous. It's crazy. What it was. It's like, and that's the kind of thing that drives me from a psychological perspective to how do you drill down to getting to where a human being starts to think like that, and then that becomes the things that we've seen in the Holocaust and in and all of the atrocities. What is the Trail of Tears in America, and of course slavery. That's a given. It's still that is just a monstrous thing. For those of you who just joined us, we're just having a chit chat with Tyson Amir, who's in Melbourne, Australia. Now I get it, Melbourne, Australia. I knew he was in Australia, just didn't know the city. And it's just a little background stuff. I'm gonna cut him loose to do the piece that he does as we ride on this journey together. Uh, closing point on the things that we talked about, and then I'm gonna back out and turn it over to you. Let me make sure I get you hosted up here. Go ahead, Tyson.
yeah. The last thing that I'll say, which is something that I learned and I see in the culture, the mainstream culture here, which was really interesting. I think it was maybe in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, something like that. There was a mass shooting that took place out here.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah. It's on. I remember because it has to be with Jesus. It has something to do with the city. The city's name, Jesus was in it in some kind of way.
yeah, you might be right.
Christchurch.
Oh no,
Christchurch.
no, no. So Christchurch was in New Zealand.
Oh, New Zealand. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
New Zealand. Yeah, this is one that happened here in Australia.
Hmm.
But immediately after that, they passed a ban on like the private ownership of firearms.
Hmm.
So it's very difficult if you were a private citizen, unless you lived out like in the territories, or you really needed to use a firearm for hunting and protection in that way to have a gun. So like in terms of that, compared to what happens in the United States, this is a much safer society because I mean you got way more guns than people in the United States, right? Here, because of this tragic experience that happened, they passed legislation to be like, mm-mm, we're not going back down that path again. So
Right.
that's something. And there's a lot of stuff. Every time I come, I'm learning more. And when I get a chance to really interact with people, the cultures, the communities, I'm learning more. But because I've been here, I've been coming here regularly, at least once, sometimes twice a year for the past 10 plus years. I've just seen a lot. I've learned a lot, talked to a lot of people, and have had an opportunity to have an experience and an understanding, a new perspective on the world, looking at it from this place. And another thing that's very interesting, it's opposite season. So
Mm-hmm.
it was summer for us, and now we come here as winter in
Oh, wow.
Australia.
MashaAllah.
And that part is
I,
always interesting.
Alhamdulillah, thank you so much. You are extremely studious, retentive, and a historian. You're a marvelous young man. I'm continuing to be continually impressed with your intellectual stature as well. I'm out. You in. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. I'll put my camera on briefly. There we go. Let me get that right. And I'll be, Imam Fahim, I'm going to be just a couple minutes because I've already talked a lot. And then I'm gonna jump off because it's 1:30 here and
Yeah,
my
I
daughter,
get
she's
it. I get it. It's
sleep.
all on you.
Okay.
It's all on you.
Okay, cool.
All
Right
right.
on. So let me do this then. I think what I was gonna do this time, so last time we had a little bit of talk for those who were on, my bad. It was we were talking about Mexico because we were doing our Black August Summer Institute and mashallah, it was beautiful. It was beautiful what we did. We had 10 young brothers. 8 of them came from the East Coast, from the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. We had 2 young brothers that came from the Bay Area. And then we had a young man who is from the area where we were at, Primo Tapia, which is 20 minutes south of Rosarito. And we had 5 days of our program. Everybody arrived on August 2nd. Program ended on August 7th. So we had a little bit of programming on the 2nd. Majority of our stuff was the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. And then we had a lot of our farewell stuff on the 7th. And just amazing. An opportunity for them to learn about their history, culture, and tradition. The textbook that I gave them for the history part of what we did was what we're looking at, the Carry On Tradition book. And I was telling y'all last time what we were getting ready to, what I was intending to teach the brothers, because we had an issue where one of the young brothers, the night before, which was Friday night, he wanted to do some practical jokes and all that. So he was dumping water on people and smacking people with wet wipes, which then turned into a food fight. So the food that we had purchased, eggs in particular, were used to crack people in the head with, and damaged furniture, the egg yolk smeared on the window. So we get the call Saturday morning from our chef who's getting ready to cook breakfast for the young brothers. She's like, there's eggs everywhere. And there's no more eggs left for us to cook breakfast, to prop the, so we go over and we got to handle some business. What ended up happening, the brothers eventually spoke up on their involvement in what took place, and we felt like we had a better understanding of what was going on. We had to make the decision to send the brother who started everything home, and his name was Mohammed. So Mohammed had to be put on the van, driven back up across the border, taken to the San Diego airport, and jump on a flight to fly back to the DMV area. And we talked to him. Of quite a bit. We talked to the entire group, and sometimes in community, you know, those are hard lessons. There are hard lessons for us to learn. And he understood. He understood why and what he needed to do different, what he needs to do different next time we're in a group setting like this. And he also understood that he's not being excommunicated by us, like we're going to cut off all communication and never interact with him. He could be a part of our stuff in the future, but when he is, we expect him to be different in the way that he's interacting with us and the way that he's interacting with the young people that are part of the group. So then we talked about some of the history of our people in Mexico. I mentioned Gaspar Yanga, who's in our text. I had mentioned the history of Vicente Guerrero, who was the second president of independent Mexico and whose pen abolished slavery in the majority of Mexico. And I talked about the Cuban Revolution and how one of its starting points was in Mexico, how the Cuban revolutionaries, that's where they were able to plan. They fled to Mexico, and Che Guevara joined them there, met them there, became a part of the plan. And then when they were like, it's time for us to go home and kick the US out of Cuba, where did they leave? Where did they board those ships? They boarded those ships in Mexico. And there's a couple other things that we talked about because I wanted the young people to understand, like, the soil that we're on is very rich soil when it comes to the history of Black people, but also like political revolutionary history, freedom fighting history, the history of resistance of Black people globally. And yeah, they felt it. And not only that, the experience that they had was just powerful, really powerful. And I will extend the invite to everybody on here, whether you're on here live or you get a chance to listen to this and watch this in the future. The place where we are in Primotopia, it's a retreat that my brother and my brother Anis Cannon, who's been living there since 2016, we've built for our people for many reasons. One is just an existential. If something goes crazy here in the States, which might happen in November, when this election finishes up, where are we gonna go? For real, like I think that's a very, very real question, which is part of the tradition, which is also part of what the Nation of Islam has represented, what the Waqf community represents in many ways. We have to build things in order to protect ourselves on multiple levels, mentally, physically, spiritually. And it has to be centered in an understanding of who we are and in our experience. So for those of us who are here on the West Coast, just think about it. Right? If something really does happen and we need to be somewhere else, where are we gonna go? And not only that, where are we gonna go where we have access to food, we have water, food as in we're not dependent on somebody else because we can grow our own food. There's animals for us if we eat animals. There's a clean water source. And then there's a way for us to be able to protect ourselves when we're in that space to be able to build our community back up. Where do we go? How many of us have those plans in place in the event that something like that happens? I can't answer that question for everybody, but that's part of why we did what we did. So that's that land. And there's two different areas that we have access to out there. It's partly for that. Another piece is sometimes we need a place to retreat and retreat in many different ways. Like the more mainstream popular usage of it, people think of a retreat as a fun luxury getaway. All right, cool. It could be that, but also from the battle, from the war that we're forced to endure in these colonial spaces that we occupy, that we live in. Sometimes we tired. We got to fall back so we can regroup, we can restore ourselves, and then we can get back to the fight. We retreat that way as well. So we created the space for that. And then just a different manifestation of our principles, our community principles, our religious principles at play. One of the lessons that always stood out to me from teachers that I've had looking at the Islamic tradition and like the community of the of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, the Ansar as well in Medina. So when Hijrah was made, one of the first things that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded the Muslims to do, he said, and this is before the masjid was built, Masjid al-Nabawi. So we need to build our own market. In Medina, the Jewish community controlled the market. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded his followers, we need to build a market. Because if you're not in control of the resources in your community, if you're not in control of the institutions within your community, you're dependent. And dependency can make you weak, especially when you're in a community setting where there's imperialism, colonization, there are these quote unquote supremacist ideologies, there's a propaganda that's going on to try to rob you of your identity, your culture, your tradition, to belittle you, to dehumanize you, all of that, which is something that we all know is part of our experience here. Well, I'm not here currently, but I'm here with y'all in spirit in the United States, but y'all get what I'm saying, right? Like all of that is alive and well. And I'll bring in one of our ancestors who will be part of our story eventually with Carry On Tradition, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey from Jamaica. He said, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. I'll say it one more time. A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. So you take people's history from them, you take their culture, you take a knowledge of their origin, a knowledge of their selves away from them, it makes it so much easier to control those people. So we don't want to be dependent. Why? This is what our elders taught us. Elders from the Wadahdin community, elders from the nation, elders from the Black Panther Party, elders from multiple political and revolutionary groups. It's part of the tradition of Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee machine. We grow our own food. We train our people on business and whatever else so we can control the resources within our community, especially in a hostile, racist environment. It's part of the example of Garvey. It's part, I mean, it's our tradition. So that's another reason why. And then with all of those people that I made mention to, they all, as communities and some of their leaders on behalf of their communities, made or started conversations with other community groups globally in order to make sure that we had allies outside of this place that we're in. So we've been in that area in Mexico and building beneficial relationships. We bring value to that community as well. Like I said, one of the young brothers from that community, he's from probably the most respected family in Primo Tapia where we're at. They send their kid to us for training. You know what I'm saying? So we bring value to the community. The community has love and respect for us. We have love and respect for them. And it's a mutually beneficial relationship for a number of reasons. And part of that is to preserve our community and a place for us to be able to build up our community, the elders in our community, the youth in our community, all of that. And so that's what we were just doing. And I mean, maybe that's just it. Well, I mean, y'all see, I got Nat Turner on here. Let me just give y'all the pictures from this section on Nat, and we can talk about Nat another time because I've been talking a lot. So in this, I'm depicting young Nat. We can get to his story a little bit later. I want y'all to see this if you haven't picked up the book yet. So this is the early 1800s. And then I'm talking about the experience of our people in Virginia in that time leading up to Nat's Great Rebellion. And then we get into the history of Nat's Rebellion and the images that I was able to create using the AI software. Just really powerful stuff. I love this. You know, I'm gonna go back here. So like this is young Nat. And then this is Nat as he's a little bit older, getting ready to lead this rebellion. And then one of the things that I do a lot with these images, I end those chapters with this legacy photo where I have the figure, especially if we're talking about one individual figure, looking at the camera. So it's like they're looking into your soul. I did what I did on behalf of our people. I carried on the tradition in my day and time. What are you gonna do? You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm hoping is being communicated visually. But we can talk about that. It's just we talked about the Australia stuff. I wanted to give y'all the full recap of the Mexico stuff. And since y'all just been looking at the screen saying Nat Turner, I wanted you to at least see the images here. But yeah, Imam Fahim, I know I've talked a lot, so I'm gonna fall back. And inshallah, that was beneficial. And I'm gonna join on the phone, so I'll be listening for a little bit, and then I'm gonna go to sleep too. So forgive me for not being on for the entire time. It's 1:39 here right now, but yeah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, shukran. And I'm gonna say takbir because that's rich, rich, rich. I mean, if you didn't get a little bitty teary-eyed a little bit, then you need to check in and see if your circulation is what it ought to be, because that's some serious stuff. But alhamdulillah, you can feel. I know I do. I feel very satisfied. And those of you who are here and present at this moment in time, God says in the Quran, "He who helps and recommends in a evil cause is a party there too, and he who helps and recommends in a good cause is a party there too." So we're all a party to a good cause that has a very deep, long history, a decorated history, and alhamdulillah, we would like to sign our names to that great scroll that says, "Hey, I did my part." And it's like, for sure, for sure. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're going to move to the next phase here. What is the next phase? Yeah, next phase is what we do.